Thank you, Gianna. Really appreciate being here today with this wonderful panel. We are talking about obstacles, and we'll touch on them briefly, but we want to focus the discussion on solutions, on how we've addressed these obstacles. We'll start with some questions for each of the panelists who are all addressing these obstacles in different ways with the multiple hats that they wear. And then we'll give the audience a chance to ask questions. So start thinking of your questions now. We'll definitely allow some additional time for discussion. Like Deborah said, one of the great things about this symposium is it is a smaller group and we can go a little more in depth with some questions. So what are the obstacles? There are really four that we're going to focus on this morning. One is the lack of transparency, and Valerie really did a great job setting up this panel. And her foundation has obviously set a high bar on sharing exactly what they're doing, as well as many of the panelists here today. But the lack of transparency, I know many foundations who don't really want anyone to know that they're doing impact investing for fear of getting overwhelmed with kind of a bunch of junk or things that just don't meet their criteria. So the lack of transparency, the confusion of terms and the alphabet soup, that all goes into mystifying something that at its heart is a very simple idea of aligning investments with values. So that's the first obstacle we're going to talk about today, is this kind of mishmash of terms and lack of transparency. A second obstacle we're going to address is the whole topic of risk and reward and risk aversion. We can't all be Silicon Valley, obviously, although New York's pretty damn close. But why is it in impact investing that the perfect seems to be the enemy of the good? There's a lot of criticism. Valerie talked about all the amazing work they're doing and some of the criticism that they're getting. Why does that happen? Why are we all trying to seek perfection in this work? And what about that attitude of just trying stuff? So risk aversion is something we're seeing. The third barrier, and the question earlier about the democratization and the elite nature of impact investing touches on the insufficient diversity in this field on the local level and nationally. Here at the High Water Women's Conference, we have a great turnout with women, and women are leading everywhere in this effort. But the people of color, Hispanic, Latino, LGBTQ, what about our rural friends? They're kind of left out of this conversation almost entirely. So the lack of diversity is a real challenge that we're seeing. And then the fourth real challenge is something we call impact washing, where since the impact investing is such a hot topic, there's kind of a lot of Johnny-come-latelys saying they're doing impact investing, but when you dig down, it's really kind of more marketing fluff. So those are the four sticking points the panel's going to talk about, and everyone has some great ideas and actual examples on how to solve them. I have Dana here, who is the actual Senior Vice President of the Heron Foundation for just another couple months when she'll be she's President-elect, actually, of the Heron Foundation. So congratulations, Dana. Everyone is universally thrilled about that decision. Michael Lear is going to be the voice of the advisor, and I'm so delighted to have Michael as part of this panel because many times in these discussions, the voice of that trusted professional financial advisor is left out of these rooms and these halls. And yet when investors are looking to get involved in impact investing or just aligning their capital with their values, who do they turn to? They turn to Michael. Going down the line with Christina is representing asset owners of all kinds, foundations, all different kinds of asset owners, and she helps them think about what is the strategy, what is the way to go forward. You know, Valerie talked about the need for education, and it sometimes takes years of conversations. But then she doesn't stop there, Christina. She moves them into action, and she helps address that mismatch between what investors are looking for and the products that are out there. So she helps make that match. And then last but not least, Laurie is the voice of sell side, which is also many times a missing voice at impact investing conferences. So guess what? The reason we're all here is because of what the entrepreneurs are doing, what the social impact is, what is happening. And we have to have investment products that actually work for them in the real world. So I'm really so glad, Laurie, that you're able to join. So I'm going to start with you, Dana. And if you could help us understand this problem of the alphabet soup. You know, why is it necessary to have special words for this kind of investing?
So that's a big question, but suffice it to say, I think the space has changed over time. And certainly Heron, who's been at this, give or take, for 20 years in different forms or fashion, we've done a pivot. We were one of the foundations who many years ago invested a lot of energy in trying to create a nomenclature that said there's mission-related investing, and beneath it there are two buckets. There's market rate and PRI. And we really spent a lot of time trying to advance that language. But we got to eat a lot of humble pie, which is when we have our most rewarding, frankly, learnings, in that when we decided to explore our portfolio to figure out what we owned, we learned very quickly that despite all the language we thought we were quite married to, everything we owned was having an impact. That we had only focused on talking about its impact when we liked what it was doing for us. So it was a real moment for us to say, you know, this mythical bar about opting to do impact investing or not opting to do impact investing, and we put so much pressure on each other to do it or to not do it or to make it look, at the end of the day, it's all nonsense. And I was so thrilled to see Anna open with complicit this morning, because one of our learnings coming through the realization that everything we owned is having impact and we needed to get real about what it was and whether we liked it or not. We had a moment in our boardroom where we said, you know what? As a provider of capital, we are in fact complicit in the behavior of the companies, public equity, private equity, venture capital, nonprofit. We are complicit in their behavior. And so the bar for us became a lot less about the specific language we were using and about understanding just what was happening, which felt like a huge leap backwards and a huge leap forward all at the same time.
Thank you for that, Dana. It's perfect. I'm going to ask each panelist to chime in on one of these obstacles, and then we're going to open up more of a round robin to the group. So Mike, we still hear prominent, highly rated financial advisors say that investing for impact requires a financial trade-off. How do you view risk and return? How do you talk to clients about this topic of risk and return?
So quite clearly that view is kind of outdated and uninformed. So I would start with that. In my journey, and I was first exposed to the space about 20 years ago, that might have been more close to reality. When you're looking at SRI and the only tools you had available were screening. We've now had this explosion in the impact, ESG, and responsible investing space where we have a lot more choice. But along with that does come some challenges, and one of them, in terms of transparency, is the data. So you have a bunch of different data sources, you've got a bunch of different ESG resources that you can use, but it's tough to parse through. And right now, in terms of research and disclosure, we're moving directionally positive, but we're not where we need to be. So one of the solutions in terms of providing solutions, and one of the themes of the panel, is the active management. So I'll give you a very specific example. If you look at a couple of years ago, I believe it was like 2015, you had the Guggenheim Solar ETF. Seems like a good thing, you get to invest in solar, you're a public investor, but they were exposed to a company called Hanergy Thin Film, which turned out to be a complete scam. It actually ended up being 12% of the ETF. And it was down 50% in the course of a few weeks once the malfeasance was exposed. So anyway, that's a finite example of what can go on when you expose yourself to just passive investing in space. So I would say go active would be a good solution. Also, in terms of risk and return, we should really, because we have so much choice, we can now look at these investments just like we would any other investment. We can look at an investor's specific objectives and tie that to the appropriate risk and return for them. And so now we have this opportunity to be able to provide, more fulsome portfolios for clients and, better solutions, which leads to one of the other challenges is people like myself, and advisors not like myself, but advisors who are they're uneducated, they're uninformed, they don't realize the choices that are out there. So I would say one of the things that people can do is ask the right questions of your advisor, ask the right questions of the organizations that you're associated with, and then to the point on greenwashing, really get involved and learn about what the process is that whatever firm you're investing in is using, because it's very easy to say, we're doing great things, but when you really drill down, you want to make sure you have a process and the conviction around that process to get the results that you want. So what I would say is that we take the approach of showing our responsible investing against classic traditional benchmarks to show that there isn't a trade-off between. So whether it's our global sustainable thematic, where we're showing them against the MSCI ACWI, we show our Muni Impact strategy against the Intermediate Muni Index and our Next 50 against the frontier markets, we're putting it out there. You can look at us against basic benchmarks and really make your own, come to your own conclusion about whether you've given up anything financially.
So it sounds like the theme is it's investing, all investments have an impact, it's good due diligence, active management, it applied to this type of investing as well. It's kind of a theme so far of the panel. Christina, if you could talk about this issue of the disconnect between what the investors are looking for and what's out there. We definitely have foundations, I know, who prefer to remain anonymous in this work. We have other foundations like the Otto Bremer Trust who just put it all out there on their website. How do you in your work help foundations kind of wade through all of this incoming information once they say that, yes, we're open for impact investing?
Great, thank you, Susan. Well, I think my comments are going to connect a lot to both Dana's and Michael's, but a lot of what Tideline is doing is essentially trying to kind of attack this inefficiency in the market related to the matchmaking process between asset owners and product providers. And I think there are myriad reasons why foundations may find it difficult to find the right investment opportunities, but I would posit that amongst those reasons, lack of investor preparedness is probably among the most important. And when we think about investor preparedness to embark on an impact investment strategy, we're really talking about the difficult work that Valerie, I think, alluded to, which is really the long and arduous process of aligning internal stakeholders around the investment approach that makes sense for the organization and really clearly articulating objectives and requirements in a way that can actually effectively be matched with product out in the market. So I think there are two types of problems, I think, when it comes to preparedness. Either an asset owner hasn't just spent the time to actually get clear on what their objectives and requirements are, or they've opted for such a highly myopic or prescriptive approach. It's Dana's special snowflake issue that practically it really can't open up an opportunity set that makes sense.
If I may, I'd like to push back a little bit. How much time does that investor preparedness take? Because Valerie said that they've actually given up giving money to influence the federal government in our country on climate change, which is just such a sad state of affairs, if my opinion. But also I've heard friends talking about the disparities in our country and the growing income disparities, health disparities, education disparities. One of my friends, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group, she says, we're at a Hurricane 4 going to a Hurricane 5. So when I hear investor preparedness, I think of like 3 years strategic planning processes that result in not much at the end in terms of money going into the causes that are really important to our country. So How long does investor preparedness typically take?
Oh, gosh. Well, it's such a great question. And I think, obviously, you know, in Tideline's work, we're always trying to time-bound our engagements and really make that process as efficient as possible. But it depends a lot on the specifics of the asset owner in question. I mean, how many internal stakeholders are there? What's the degree of diversity in kind of understanding of investor markets? We've worked with groups of trustees that are very heterogeneous in their comprehension of investment as a tool. And so sometimes that early stage education process itself requires several months. Sometimes you're dealing with a group of stakeholders internally that are investment professionals, already have a strong sense of what the requirements are, but need some clarity on specific mission objectives and so on. So it's months to years. You're absolutely right. It can take years in some cases.
Heron, how long?
Well, we've been at it 25 years or so, and yeah, I just have to say this is such a massive soapbox for me because, and I'll be brief, I promise, but the idea that sitting in something we've decided is unacceptable as an alternative to making a step is lunacy. And I know you feel that too in client engagements, but from Heron, yeah, I'm on the soapbox all the time. But to me, it just feels like, what is the opportunity cost to people, place, and planet of our complacency that it's better to sit in a, quote, conventional investment that we've already decided we don't like because we can't find perfect. I mean, there is value in incrementalism, and until we stop beating up on each other, that if your thing isn't perfect, I'm going to complain about it, the space is not going to advance. So I will stand down.
Awesome. Yeah. But you'll be available out on your soapbox. Okay, so Laurie, now to bring it on home, we've heard investors say, you know, we can't do this kind of investing because we can't find product that meet our criteria. We need market rate product. It has to be liquid. It has to go meet the board criteria. First of all, do you think there is adequate investable product? And how can the investees, the sell side, how can they position themselves to access the really big money? How can they get there?
Right. Thanks, Susan. I'm going to be joining the soapbox and the chorus up here. I mean, look, Anna said it at the opening, we've been in this room for 5 years, and it's stunning, the explosion, literally the explosion of investable products in the course of the last 5 years. So I do think there's a rich, dynamic, interesting universe cutting across asset classes, whether you're looking in the public markets, in the private markets, equity, fixed income, around certain thematics that motivate you. There are new entrants. There are entrants who now have real track record and real materiality to their operations. So I just think the conversation, I think that's a red herring argument. Could we have more product? Absolutely. The omission that we acknowledged, Valerie acknowledged on the stage this morning in response to Erica's question, the retail investor has been largely excluded from the conversation. So we don't have sufficient investment product purposely for the retail investor. Last year on this very stage, Elizabeth Littlefield and I talked about the prognostications. We hope that every 401k would have an offering for impact down the road. We're not there yet, but I do think there's substantial progress, and I think that it's just a red herring argument to push back on. And the counter also sometimes what Christina said is the myopic expectations. I mean, my joke sometimes is when I'm working with very, very well-intentioned organizations, they'll say, Laurie, if you can find me a deal in northern Uganda focused on adolescent girls who need clean water, then I'll invest. I'm like, it's just not how it works. And so aligning with the things that motivate you from a values point of view, which also was welcomed on the stage this morning, a thematic point of view, there is more robust choice. So because we are sell side and really thinking about that first mile of impact, the impact we also desperately want to empower, we really think about how do we bridge the perception of gap, which I think is a perceived gap, not a real gap, between product or the sources and uses of capital. The mindset word is what we use a lot that Valerie invited on the stage this morning. And the tool, the tactic we try to use to get beyond it, because there's a lot of awareness now. I think we actually have, it's beyond awareness, it's mindset, is ask the right questions of the totality of your portfolio. Exactly where Dana and Heron have gone for years. You learn a lot when you see the linkages, and you begin to change people's behaviors when you ask the same impact-related questions across the totality of the portfolio. The second thing, it's the advisory juggernaut for me. Michael is, and the people in this room, you are the exception to the rule. In our daily life, we don't even get to have the engaged debate about what is this deal really about, the rigor of the due diligence, which we welcome. We don't get there oftentimes. We get the very polite, this is so interesting. Very interesting. Really like that. Gosh, fascinating. Keep us posted on how that's going. But I mean, you know, the real roll up your sleeves, let's apply some due diligence, and the rigor, which, as I say, we welcome. So the advisory juggernaut, it's really a tough landscape for us still, so we just encourage you in your communities. And then the third is how do I begin? So I'd like to get started, but either because of my institutional complexity, my size and scale, the people who are my trustees, how do I even begin? And as a tactic, we have found this allocation tactic as a very useful tool. And what I mean by that is creating sometimes people call it a special wallet. It was mentioned this morning, a percentage of your overall capital. Not because that's the end game, but we find it's a very helpful starting point. You then have to resource it appropriately, including with people with the motivation, the right tools and experience and skills, either internally generated or externally supported. But if you look at some of the institutional players, AXA, for example, was a leader in this and making it first a 200 million euro specific allocation, which now has been doubled. Foundations have done this, family offices. So I just think that allocation tool, at least getting my toe into the water, can be helpful.
Thank you, Laurie. I'd love to hear a debate a little bit about to dive more onto the getting into the investment advisor and investment consultant arena. But I do want to pause here and invite questions from all of you. So if you'd like to line up at the microphones, that would be helpful because this is being recorded so then people can hear your questions. So yes.
I'm Diane Keefe, and I'm here on behalf of the American Friends Service Committee Investment Committee. And I just wanted to hear from the panel about the importance of changing the institution's investment policy statement and hardwiring who gets appointed to the investment committee so that carbon neutrality is a guiding principle so that we don't have shifts when investment committee members change. Thank you.
Okay, so embedding carbon policy in investment policy statement and investment committees. Who'd like to tackle that one?
Well, I can start and let others weigh in. I do think actually the process of articulating on paper the beliefs of an organization, the investment beliefs as an organization as it relates to the broader mission in society is a really, really important activity. It's sort of the end of a longer process of really debate and dialogue that needs to take place within investment committees and boards. But as a way of codifying the beliefs and making it sort of a living, breathing document along with the requirements that go along with that, I think it's critical.
I would just add very briefly, I think I completely agree. And what we've seen is in some of the very large pension funds, the gap between the actual asset owner and then their manager. And I think making the mandate explicit in writing helps to bridge that gap, because you talk to the asset owner and say, well, yeah, I expect my manager to do it. You talk to the manager, I don't have that mandate. I don't have the mandate. And so I do think that, yeah, the codification can be a bridge.
We've also seen some foundations do a sub-account to kind of get at that issue. It's not the end game, just like the carve-out, but a sub-account can help with the perceived fiduciary issues that some of the outsourced CIOs face. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, what a magnificent panel. Thank you, all of you. My name is Vivina Berla. I'm a co-managing partner of Serona Asset Management. We focus on private equity in frontier and emerging market for development and purpose. We've been at Impact Investing for a very long time. I love Dana's admittance of how difficult it is and how the debate and the discourse has evolved over the years. In my own personal journey, which, by the way, I started with Laurie about 6-7 years ago, I have come to the conclusion, and why did it take me so long, that everything that we invest in has impact. The question is, how can we maximize the positive impact and minimize the negative impact? And then you start getting into the whole vexed question of defining it and measuring it, etc., which is not for today. My question for you, the panelists, is, have you found that the SDGs, which are now recognized and identified by the world, is actually a useful framework to shift the conversation from impact to sustainable development across the world? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Sustainable development goals, are they helpful in defining impact?
Yeah, I mean, they're the framework that we use for our global sustainable strategies, and they're part of the core of our investment process. So I would say they're extremely helpful in defining the universe that we should be looking at, and in the end, the outcomes that we'd like to see. So I think they're tremendously helpful.
I think the SDGs sort of get at one of the big kind of barriers in the market that, Susan, you introduced the panel with, which is the alphabet soup. And when it comes to institutional players putting assets at scale to work in impact, I think the SDGs have been a very important sort of common universal language for organizing investment opportunities. I don't think they're sort of the end-all and be-all. There's a lot of work that needs to go behind the SDGs in terms of translating them into actual investment opportunities and impact metrics and so on. But they've been very important, I think, particularly in the public markets.
Yeah. I would agree, and the language is accessible. It's accessible language. It's very difficult to get lost in at least what you're talking about thematically. And your question, Susan, that you asked, how do investees penetrate capital pockets? I think the SDGs have proven to be a helpful wrapper, in a way, for your deal to at least get a little bit more engagement or traction in consideration.
And I would completely agree, and I see my colleague who's probably like, no, please don't go here, Dana. But I would completely agree, and I think the language has been very helpful in the space, and it's given us a lot to unify around, which in and of itself is significant. I will say, as an investor and as a practitioner in the space, one of the things we struggle with the SDGs is that the prize in the SDGs is often 24 orders of magnitudes removed from an action that a corporation takes in a moment. Right. And as an investor, we struggle with that. Yeah. Because we're in the weeds with data, we like data, our Occam partners are here. And so for us, the SDG is not the end-all be-all. It's hugely important, but they're not first-order magnitude of effect when a corporation makes a decision about their behavior, and they're not often second. So we still struggle with that gap, but their value in the market has been tremendous.
We're also seeing the SDGs as an on-ramp for corporate involvement in impact investing. They may not call it impact investing, but they're using SDGs in their philanthropy and a lot of their business work, and so we're seeing it as an on-ramp for them. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to conclude the panel. You can be thinking about your kind of final kind of action advice, your soundbite for the audience. So be thinking about that. I'll take the final question.
Good morning. My name is Laurie Cameron-Craighead. I recently worked in research at the Yale School of Management. I'm somebody who's worked on the classic portfolio investment side for over 30 years in my career, and I'm trying to convert to social impact investing. So I've found microfinance, I've found some PRI investments, green bonds, what's becoming pink bonds, but I would be very grateful as somebody who knows probably less than anyone else in the room about the investments, any publications, periodicals, newspapers that you read that are very insightful or offer some good information about portfolio management or product management on the impact investing side. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. What's your favorite way to keep up on the news and impact investing and to learn about it? Got a favorite?
to hazard into my inbox once in a while.
Well, I mean, I do know that David Banks is here. He's here from
Yeah,
Impact
Impact
Alpha. If you're not
Alpha.
subscribing to Impact Alpha, definitely subscribe
I was
while you're
going to
sitting
say
here
the
today.
same thing.
It's-
Impact Alpha has been a great contribution to this market.
So Impact Alpha has a daily brief that they'll send to your inbox, which you might occasionally look at. But
And then it
it's
will
also got a
steer
great
you, but
website.
it's really efficient.
Very
and then you
good.
can drill down or double click on the things that are most appealing to you.
Yeah. Also on the private side, you've got the gym. They have the impact base.
Okay.
So that's a good place to look at.
Global Impact Investing Network. The CFA Institute actually also has some very good, well-researched articles in the CFA Institute magazine and other blogs and scholarly articles. That's been helpful.
And also in terms of democratizing things, Morningstar has now come out in MSCI, so there are plenty of places to look that didn't exist a short time ago.
I also like the Case Foundation did a short square guide called, the Short Guide to Impact Investing. And the short guide is I think it's about 30 pages, but other short guides are about 150. So I do like the short guide from the Case Foundation. Let me wrap up this panel with kind of our final topic. If you are all grand dames and messieurs of impact, what is your one piece of advice that you could give to people in the room?
We'll go
that way.
I would just say get started. I mean, just get started. I mean, we all come, we spend time talking and thinking and analyzing and sharing, and that's extraordinarily useful and helpful. But get started. I mean, there's just, and whatever is holding you back, or whatever modesty has to inform that action, that's fine. But there's just lots of choice, lots of opportunity, lots of allies to help you along the way, and get started. Make a commitment today that a year from now I'm going to be able to come back and talk about one deal, something I've done that has progressed and I've learned from it. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when you do.
So a woman this morning told me that, congratulated me on a moment in my career when I was quite audacious and started the social finance group at JP Morgan. And my immediate response was it was luck and circumstance. And she said, own your courage. And so I think we all have to own our courage in this room, be audacious. Don't be fearful and don't be discouraged. There will be many, many people who will tell you that this doesn't make any sense. Many people with a lot more experience than you may have, but I think it's important to be audacious.
And we appreciate your boldness, Christina. Thank you.
Yeah, so along those same lines, I would say push your advisors. There's a lot of people out there that made millions of dollars and are hard to push off of what they've been doing. So if I've had this small sleeve of clients that are doctors and they just want specific, investment advice, why would I be encouraged to change unless and until my client comes and pushes me and asks the right questions of myself and the organization in order to get the place that they want to be.
And I think I would say if you're an asset owner, don't do what we did. Don't. That's a much longer conversation. Don't start by trying to add new things to your portfolio that are perfect. Start with just a baseline of what do we own, what's knowable about the effect of what we own, and then start to make judgments about how that effect sits with you. Is it acceptable? Is it unacceptable? If it's unacceptable, what do you do? Just start there. And one word of caution about myopia, is that a word? From us, from our point of view, we were very focused on labor, human capital, that sort of thing. Caution, cut yourself a break. When we focused on that, we got results we didn't like because things we could be very excited about through our unique lens, when we broadened our aperture to take into account the other effects of the enterprise or the corporation, we found the trade-offs were increasingly unacceptable. And so know what you're looking for and then broaden your aperture a bit and say, but is the trade-off too much? Should we trade great labor for dirty air? Should we trade great labor for, in Heron's experience, the best labor we found when we went looking for a single piece of data turned out to be in private prisons. Not acceptable. So as you're looking for your thing, know what you're looking for and then pull back a little bit, but please get started.
As you're looking for your snowflake, look at all the other snowflakes out there too.
Which I think I stole from Deborah, by the way, the whole special
We all
snowflake thing.
steal from Deborah.
Okay, or Kimberly, okay.
Or Kimberly. So I would say don't forget the CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions. They're a great way to get started in impact investing. You can make a program-related investment. There are other products you can actually buy a note and invest in. These institutions, some of which have been around for 30 and 40 years, and I think they're sometimes forgotten in impact investing circles. Deborah brought them up. I think they're a great resource. So thank you to the panel. Thank you all very much.